Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining this session. This is how Rochester can become a hub for entrepreneurs. I'm Karen Hyder, your host for this session, standing by to help out if you have any technical issues. We're just about ready to begin our live session, and just a reminder, our session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available later on. We encourage you to use chat. Just mouse over that black toolbar at the bottom edge of your screen to display the tools. Click on Chat to display that panel, and then you can type to us. Direct your messages to all panelists or all panelists and attendees. We're just about ready to begin our session. Please stand by. Again, I'd like to welcome everyone to this live session. I'm going to turn things over now to you, Alex, to go ahead and begin when you're ready.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Karen, and thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Alex Zapisochny. I'm the publisher of the Rochester Beacon, and we're very happy to be co-sponsoring and co-presenting this event with NextCore, which we'll hear from in just a couple minutes. And to give a little bit of an introduction around what is this topic and why have we chosen to do it today, it certainly seems like we in our community, like in many communities across the country, each year have a number of discussions around how do we attract entrepreneurs, how do we attract startups. It's a big question, it's a continuous question, but it also may sometimes lull us into the belief that not much changes from year to year. But the reality is that a lot has changed in recent years, and in particular in the last 16 months. And some of those changes include the fact that people are feel very differently now about working with remote teams. People certainly seem to have a greater appreciation for not so large cities, the kind of medium and smaller size cities that have a high quality of life. There's also an increasing competition for talent across the country. And we're not just talking about the kind of talent that we've been reading all about in terms of people working in restaurants and retail and the like, but really there's a huge competition for the kind of sophisticated tech talent that we seem to have a lot of in Rochester. So we're going to be talking about all of these sorts of issues and what is it that Rochester ought to be doing, should be doing better in order to be really much more attractive to more startups and entrepreneurs coming here. So we'll start that in just a minute. And for now, I'd like to introduce Jim Senal, who is president of NextCore, to also provide a few opening words. Jim?
Well, thank you so much, Alex. NextCore is really proud to be partnering with the Rochester Beacon on this very important topic, which is, of course, near and dear to our hearts. Our mission is to help entrepreneurs launch and grow companies. We've always believed Rochester can be and should be a nationally recognized hub for entrepreneurship and innovation. We were pleased over the last year or two that that belief has been validated by a couple of national studies by the Brookings Institution, which ranked us 5th as a potential growth center, and MIT professors' Jumpstarting America book, where Rochester ranked #1 for highest potential to become a new tech hub city. We've seen steady increase in entrepreneurial activity over the years. As you said, things have changed a lot. Since opening our tech hub incubator at the Sibley building 3 years ago, we've worked with over 110 local startup companies. In addition to that, we have multiple accelerator programs. You're going to hear about Luminate in a second. That works with dozens of others from all around the world. So we're bullish on the future of innovation and entrepreneurship here in Rochester. We look forward to working with many of our partners to help drive that growth. And thanks again to the Beacon for all that you guys do on behalf of the community and for allowing us to partner on this event. Back to you, Alex. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. So I'm happy now to introduce our panelists, and I'll give a very brief introduction for each of them, and we'll ask them to elaborate further. Our first panelist is Sujatha Ramanujan. She is Managing Director of Luminate New York, which is a global accelerator for startups in optics, photonics, and imaging technologies. It has successfully attracted attention from early stage companies from around the globe who now spend time or set up all or part of their operations here in Rochester and work with local companies. The second panelist is Rami Katz. Rami is Chief Operating Officer of Excel Ventures. And he has been actually promoting the strengths of this region for a number of years, and most recently through an initiative called R2I, where he is working to connect Israeli startups and companies to local organizations. And finally, our third panelist is Nish Sonwalkar. He is CEO of Sundensity, which relocated to Rochester to expand its manufacturing and operations. This photonics-based startup won the top prize, $1 million, and was named Company of the Year at the culminating event of Luminate's third cohort. So I want to welcome all three of you to the panel, and let's actually start with Sujatha. Can you perhaps expand a little bit on the introduction of yourself, and in particular talk a little bit about what your experience has been like speaking with all of these different entrepreneurs and startups that are interested in potentially coming here and joining Luminate?
Well, thank you very much for having me on your program. This is very exciting and a topic near to our hearts. I personally am a physicist, and I've had 3 startups, and the last one was started here. And I really think that this is an excellent environment with really the right infrastructure, both in terms of business infrastructure and physical infrastructure to grow businesses. And we are an optics hub. So it was really a natural place to set up something like Luminate. It's been a really exciting time here when we meet so many different companies. We have 43 companies that have gone through these cohorts. And they come from all over the world and from all different walks of life, all different, young, they're old, there's just such a wide variety of types of people that come, and they all come for the same thing, which is the infrastructure that is Rochester, the 150 or so optics companies, the universities. There's just a lot of the pieces that make a business successful that already exist in this region and are very, very cool. So I think we've had a really positive experience with a lot of companies. So I encourage people to do it here.
Excellent, thank you. And Rami, if you can go next, tell us a little bit more about your background, how you actually came to Rochester, and then also some of the work that you've been doing to speak to companies and entrepreneurs and in other parts of the world, and how that's gone.
So thank you, Alex. Thank you, and to the Beacon and to NextCore for organizing this. Is, I think, very important event. It really is in the heart of driving a lot of the stuff that we are looking for. So in about 2 months, it will be 20 years since I arrived at Rochester. Never heard of Rochester, New York before that. When every time I Googled something, I found Rochester, Minnesota. Never thought I'll stay here more than 2 years, but fell in love with the place, and 20 years later, I'm still here and happy to call this home. What I saw and we continue to see with Excel, so I'll maybe give you one sentence background about Excel. Excel is a venture capital fund. We're located in Rochester, New York. We invest across upstate New York with a real focus of the Rochester, the Finger Lakes region. The last 2 years, we wrote about $8 million worth of checks with about $55 million of co-investments from across the region, strategic partner and other large funds. So definitely a lot of activity here. Alongside my personal experience, I said, when again, never heard of Rochester before, today it'd be very difficult to drag me out of here because of the quality of life and the real business opportunities we see here. I'll maybe give you some indication to what we see when we talk to other CEOs of other companies coming here. So I was talking to a CEO of an Israeli company that was trying to relocate here, and talked about, I want you to have an office in Rochester. I said, well, I want to have an office in New York City. I understand. I said, look, but for $15,000, you'll have an office in Rochester and some presence, 2, 3 technical people would be great. I said, look, we cannot afford $15,000 a month. I said, a month? That's $15,000 a year. And he's looking and said, are you telling me I can have an office with some people for $15,000 a year? I said, yes. Right? It's inconceivable. And if you go up to technical talent, right, we only invest in companies that have strong IP behind them, and we're very fortunate to have met Nish and Sundensity through Luminate and the program that Sujatha runs, right? When you look for technical talent, you have very strong talent here that remains affiliated with the company for significant periods of time, grow together at very, very reasonable costs. So from the financial standpoint, even before you start talking about all the quality of life items that we all know about Rochester, this is an amazing place to be here. And I'm personally very fortunate I found it. So thank you.
Excellent. And Nish, if you can tell us a little bit more both kind of your personal background as well as your startup, and basically what was the journey that ended up leading you to Rochester?
Sure. And again, I want to first thank you, Alex, and Rochester Beacon, as well as NextCore for organizing this event. So my background, I came to this country a long time back as a graduate student, like most of us come to this country. Did my PhD at MIT, and then joined faculty of MIT Mechanical Engineering and other. And later on, out of my academic background and doing a whole bunch of consulting with companies, I was bitten by the entrepreneurial bug. And I think that's when I became full-time entrepreneur gradually, but surely. And I think our area of expertise coming out of molecular dynamics and laser Raman spectroscopy of nano interfaces and materials came up with some inventions and tried to look for a home for photonic invention that we came up with photonic smart coating. And that's when I was introduced to Luminate, and I joined some of the Luminate activities, and Sujata introduced me to the Rochester. And out of those activities, we applied to Luminate Incubator and participated in the competition. And after almost 1 year, we were the top winner. And that gives a significant incentive for Sundensity, which started in Boston as an MIT spinoff, to be now relocating into Rochester. So I think it's a great win for Rochester, for Sundensity to be in Rochester. At the same time, great win for Boston, to a Boston-based company to find a home in a photonic capital of the world. So we are quite happy to be here.
Excellent. So maybe back to you, Sujata, when you have these discussions initially, what is it that entrepreneurs seem to already know or think about Rochester? Especially maybe let's focus on some of the positives and the assets that they're aware of.
Yeah, so again, Luminate is a optics and photonics and imaging fund, and we're an investments fund. So when we say Nish won the first prize, he won an investment of $1 million. He didn't get like a big check to go off to wherever with. It's an investment that the region is making into his business. And most of the companies that apply to us, especially more and more recently, they see Rochester as an optics and photonics industrial hub. It's an international hub. It has the Institute of Optics. It has all of these different companies. It has talent. It has, when you're starting a business, a lot of what they're looking for is how to get the product out the door. And there are elements of the supply chain and of staffing that are non-trivial to get anywhere. But this region, because it is an optics and photonics hub, they're able to hire talent. They're able to get the supply chain in place. If they have optics components made or assemblies made, there are people who can do that. There is the laboratory physical type of infrastructure that exists because companies like Kodak existed and spawned other companies. So if somebody says, I want to do a coating line, there is actually a coating line. So for a company coming here, what they have is the technical expertise and assistance to speed their time to market without having to shell out an enormous amount of capital dollars. So it is well suited for this industry. So many people are very well aware of Rochester and of the Institute and of optics, and they're coming here because of that. When a company comes because of the money, and it's just the money, they're probably a bad match. They have to love something about the region, and some of them come without as much knowledge of the region. Maybe they have a little bit. They've done some looks and they say, "Oh, there's AIM Photonics, there's this, there's that." But when they come and they spend some time and they get to know us, they realize really what an advantage just to be here.
And actually, for Rami, your Excel kind of looks obviously more broadly than photonics and optics. So maybe even thinking a little bit more about things like healthcare, software, some of the other things that you invest in. What are those sorts of companies? When you speak to their entrepreneurs, what are they aware of relative to Rochester, and maybe what are the things that they're impressed by and that potentially draw them?
So unless they're coming from the, if companies are coming from the region, are usually very much aware that the Rochester region is probably one of the strongest, if not the strongest, in upstate New York. And historically, we've seen that all the time. When you're talking companies out of the region, I'll say this way, most of them have no clue what Rochester is. If they do know anything, they know a little bit about RIT, U of R, and Cornell, the strong brand names of this university. Some of them don't even make the connection that Xerox, Bausch & Lomb, or Kodak are headquartered here, right? So it's a little bit of an uphill battle to start it. But once you get your foot in the door in terms of the discussion, I think it becomes much, much easier, to a point where the number of times I describe the assets we have in the region, I get, are you sure? This is some sort of a BS, it's a professional term, sales job that are giving me, or is that for real, right? And we have real cases of people that we've learned to send the CEOs to talk to other folks. So the advantages are very clear. Talent is relatively abundant here in most areas. Compensation for that talent is relatively reasonable or favorable to the company, not as expensive as it is. The big thing that we've learned that I didn't appreciate before is the affinity to the companies. The Rochester workforce tends to be more loyal to their employer. They don't just hop up and jump off and I went to have a cup of coffee, had a call with the CEO of the competitor, and tomorrow thinks I'm gone, right? Which makes for a better relationship. Right? Employers and employees really feel like an affinity and a connection together, which makes it, I think, a better environment for overall. There are some challenges, which I'm sure we can get to them later on, but the flip side to the story. But from that perspective, I think to just a hit on many of them. Whenever you need manufacturing, there's space, there's capacity and capabilities here that are really difficult to find in many other places in the world, definitely at this level of abundance and level of cost, right? And the second biggest thing is talent. And we have a lot of strong issues. Very specifically, we're working on attracting, not everything that we do is focused on Israel, but it just happens that the cool stories are coming right now from Israel. So we're bringing in a company that has their phase 2 clinical trials and have a cure for MS, for multiple sclerosis. There's nothing like that anywhere in the world. University of Rochester has one of the foremost thought leaders in MS, the head of MS here. So our due diligence was very easy. Make introduction, get their thoughts on the matter. They liked it. They joined the scientific advisory board, right? So now you have a world-class asset that is known literally throughout the universe of MS research, that is sanctifying this opportunity, right? You cannot get that anywhere else. Definitely not at this manufacturing environment and cost environment.
So Nish, it was obviously mentioned earlier that you originally came to Rochester because of Luminate. You know, obviously it's a kind of a great asset, and it's certainly understandable that your company would relocate here as a result, or come here as a result and apply. What is it that maybe you've learned during your time here, and maybe even about kind of the broader entrepreneurial community in Rochester that you have, that good or bad? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. So I think one of the great things that we observed, that people are much nicer here. Just to say that for the entrepreneurs to really create their product. Because what happens, we come up with the idea, but we need a place to create our prototype, and we need a very supportive environment, which is going to say, come on in, I'll help you put together your prototype. And so when we came here and talked to UFR and RIT, we were accepted with open arms. And so that's what encouraged me quite a bit. And in fact, I then did almost 6 months of product development here, which got us to the place where in Luminate, they were able to see from the beginning of the competition to the end, we made enormous progress. And that progress didn't happen just because of us, but because there were other experts and also access to the nano fabrication lab and also RIT's labs as well. So that allowed us to prove our concept in a way that we were able to get third-party validation of it. So I think that is very important step for entrepreneurs, primarily because that is the stage where they need to attract the funding with a third-party validation, some prototypes, and that activity cannot be done in isolation. And so ecosystem matters a lot. And I think that's one. In terms of the challenges, I think the challenges were to understand the dynamics of the region, understand that how do we find the talents, how do we get to the interns that will help you initially, and then of course to hire top level executive, which we have started to do now, especially ex-Kodak employees and ex-Xerox employees with enormous amount of experience. So I think finding talent is not as easy as you all know, with the same fit that you are looking for. But I think it's a good hunting ground for you to find talents.
So at this point, we're actually going to ask something of our audience. So we have a few questions that we're going to be asking. We actually want to ask the first two of them now. And Karen, if you can first put up the first one. Oh, perfect. We actually have both of them up. So if everybody can quickly participate and read both questions, it would be great to understand kind of the composition of the people listening today.
And remember to click submit.
Okay, excellent. Hopefully that was enough time. So a couple of questions. One of the things that you all heard in the, oh, actually there's the results. Wow, that was quick. That was very instantaneous. All right, so 97% of the people were born in the US, and it's about 50-50 in terms of those who are from Rochester versus other parts. That's very interesting. So, and actually, I'll note that, Sujatha, I believe you're born in the US, correct? So yes, so two of the three panelists, Rami and Nish, are both born outside the US, as was I. So at some point, maybe we'll talk about the international flavor of that as well. But the next, I mean, I had mentioned in the intro that a lot of things have basically changed, a lot of different work practices, remote work, things like that, since the onset of COVID-19. And maybe the question is really to Sujatha and Rami, and Sujatha can go first. I mean, what do you think of some of those changes and how that impacts the ability of Rochester to position ourselves as a kind of welcoming place for entrepreneurs and startups?
So there's both a positive and a negative. The positive actually far outweighs the negative. And I'll tell you what I found since we went into lockdown. Many companies, particularly international companies that want to establish their US business or want to, even whether it's a sales office or repurpose here, or if they need access to the United States. And coming through a program like Luminate is really a nice, especially with the borders closed, it was extremely difficult for them to access US business. But if they do something like Luminate, even if they are remote, being a Luminate company means that they have access to facilities and infrastructure, and we can bring in staff to support them until they can come. So we actually got a real increase in the number of applicants that are further along with their business and want to manufacture here, want to be more of a US business. So I think it really provided a really nice soft landing. And I think that especially because of remote and lockdown, people were suddenly much more aware of how difficult it was going to be able to launch a business in the US. And so they looked at Rochester and they looked at these programs and they looked at everything they could do here. And we suddenly were actually bombarded with people whose businesses were not super early necessarily, that were ready to hire, that were ready to put some infrastructure in. So that was a really surprising positive thing that came out of being in lockdown. We also got excellent engagement for our online classes because suddenly we've moved all of our coursework online. Like when people are present, I think there's something to be said about the dynamics of being next to people, but more people were able to grasp and attend and understand. And I think that was really good. The negative, of course, is that people get an idea of what Rochester is. They may like the infrastructure and the business, they can see all that and think it's fantastic. But until you come here, you don't realize what a really pretty town it is. that, you can go kayaking and you can go biking. And then there's, when it's not all locked down, there's a wonderful arts sector here. It's not, you can tell people that and you sound like a postcard, but when they come here and experience it, they're like, this actually is a really nice community. So I think that piece, I miss having the people here so that they could see what a marvelous place it is. I miss the Jazz Festival.
Well, it's coming back next year, right? So, Rami, what do you think of sort of the impact of COVID-19 on the things we're trying to do to position ourselves in Rochester?
I don't want to be wishy-washy, but I think it really is too early to tell, and we don't know. I've seen some of our portfolio companies were able to actually access what I would call higher caliber of talent, especially on the business development and sales side, out of larger metro areas, because it's much easier to work remotely. Where I'm not sure is a lot of what we do is around innovation, and I think it's very difficult to do innovation and bring new products and new technologies to market remotely. I think that you need some elbow brushing and kind of, pressure makes diamonds, as sort of an environment working together, fertilizing each other. And I think we're losing parts of that in the remote workplace, and I see more. So been trying to track it in terms of real estate trends, et cetera. And I think I've seen a lot of the more innovative companies I'm looking at are coming back faster than I thought they would come back. Although some of the more kind of logistics and sales support, et cetera, areas are very natural to continue remotely. So I think it's both areas. What I'm hoping, and we see that there's what we would call the COVID refugees from out of areas from like New York City, Boston, and areas are coming here, and as Sujata said, they get a place here where you don't have to hide in a closet during a pandemic, and you actually have some room, and you can go on a walk, on a bike, on a hike, and live life, and then you can telework. So I think my assumption it will impact us more in the ability to see talent in our neighborhood that is staying here and working remotely. I'm still kind of learning, or we are still learning how it will affect the local companies that we have here in the workforce and their ability to really attract talent. It seems to be conducive. I mean, logically it would, but I want to see that rubber meet the road and actually see it happen in reality.
So Nisha, a slightly different question for you, but it kind of builds on some of the things that we've just been talking about in terms of what stage of company, or kind of what's the kind of the age and the character of a company that is probably most likely to be attracted here. Could you talk a little about Sundensity, kind of how long it had been around, how many kind of what were how mature was it in terms of technology and things like that, to get a sense of kind of at what stage of the company really came here?
Sure. So I think normally ideas are generated in the entrepreneur's mind, and number one thing is to prove it, right? So that you have to create some kind of validation, proof points, etc. And at that point, I don't think any venture capitalists want to put any money in you. There's too much risk for them. So I think just in terms of context of Sundensity, we started in 2016, germinating ideas from the work that I was conducting. But then we realized that in order for it to get the legs, we do have to develop some prototypes, etc. And so this is called almost like pre-seed. So idea is there, but not enough data there to get some legs for it to move forward. And at that time, it's very difficult to get any money. So at that point, we normally go to National Science Foundation, which are called the risk capital of United States. Or we go to places like incubators, which are going to bet on you with some money. So for example, Luminate, there are about 20 participants in the competition after 130 people applied, etc. But out of these 20, they chose 10 to be given $100,000 initial risk capital that they are putting into. And then look for 6 months. If you made really good progress, we'll give you additional $1 million or less for you to grow from there. So I think in terms of the phases, what happens now, we are in the seed phase. So we were in the pre-seed phase when we came to Luminate. Now with the money that we got, we are in the seed phase now. And now we are ready to what we call a Series A funding. So I think that's where what happens now that we raised about, besides Luminate, we raised total $3 million in the pre-seed. The seed phase, what will happen is we have to now get big equipment, manufacturing line and stuff like that. So there is a gap here now which needs to be filled up. So I think I do want to throw that as a challenge, that so you have a whole bunch of bubbles growing as the startup companies, but they have to get to a critical size in order to grow from those bubble phase. Otherwise they collapse because there's not enough activation energy there for them to grow. So now we want to get next level of funding for companies like Sundance City so they can create manufacturing in the United States. That will be Series A funding. And of course, from there onwards, they become what is called as a revenue generating company. One of the biggest challenges for the company like us, which are getting into manufacturing, is that unless we have manufacturing line, we are not generating revenue. So we are pre-revenue companies, and they are very hard to get funded. So I was extremely lucky to find the right ecosystem and the right interest and the investment from Luminate and subsequently from Clean Energy Venture Group in Boston in order to get us going. But I think at this point, we still need equipment and manufacturing line to become revenue generating, which is still an year ahead. And so we have made decision to make Rochester as the hub for us to start the manufacturing process.
And thank you. And actually, we're going to put up our third question at this point. So Karen, if you can get that ready. Now, this is not a yes or no question. You'll see that that question is going to be in one sentence. What is Rochester's greatest asset for attracting entrepreneurs and startups? So if we can put that up and give everybody a little time to write that out. We're not going to put up the answers, but we'll actually use that as the basis of another question or two. And I'll kind of give everybody a few seconds or about 10 seconds to think about it and write something out.
Alex, I don't have a special window for this, but if folks can type in the Q&A or in chat, then we can see everyone's responses there.
Perfect. Okay, so as people continue to write, actually, let me ask the next question. Oftentimes, especially when people think about what are the different economic development strategies for being able to attract entrepreneurs and startups, there's always kind of some debate and opinions on what is really kind of the stage of company that is kind of the best ones for us to try to attract or focus on. Is it kind of that very early stage that still requires a lot of innovation? Is it somebody that's moved along a little bit? And I recognize that, Sujatha, Ram, you have kind of a particular focus, but just thinking more broadly than that, if you were in charge of Rochester and could do kind of anything possible to really optimize things for Rochester and our startup economy, what sort of stage of company or type of entrepreneur do you think is sort of the most useful for us as a community to try to create programs and spend effort to attract? And Sujatha, if you can go first.
So the answer differs whether if you're trying to bring somebody new into the region or you're trying to promote a business that already exists in the region. If you're trying to bring somebody into the region, there are two completely different types of businesses I would target. Businesses that are like niches, where they had a good concept, some early validation, but did not yet have the infrastructure in place, but they had some talent and they had, a proof of concept, so that the thing was solid, and they needed a place to root and grow. And I think that was really, so that type of stage business is usually, it's still a seed business because as Nish said, he didn't have revenue, he had a concept. So that's actually, and this is a good place to bring that, because you can't be in an expensive place before you have revenue, or you'll just run out of cash. And so that stage is really, really good. To contrast that, the other type of stage that we can bring in is somebody who really does have a business. Maybe they're an A or a B round, but they don't have a US presence, and they need to build a manufacturing infrastructure. They need the supply chain, and they need that US presence. Actively recruiting in that space. And this is not an optics statement. This is really those are two stages of business that we really can actively seek from if they're coming to the region. If they're already in the region, I think we need to get to people a little bit earlier, because the struggle a lot of entrepreneurs have, and I'm specifically referring to people who are not necessarily well supported. So if you're talking about people who are coming to school, or people who are starting a non-tech business in the city or something like that, they may have a great concept, but that's where if a little bit of support around marketing and sales and how do you actually structure your business, that's a very early stage business. That stage is really, it's like a baby, right? You want to help those people in that stage, and it doesn't take a lot of money and effort to do that. But I think that we can do that. And I'm sorry, I'm going on a little bit. There's one other piece that's really that I've found in recent years that has really drawn my attention. And that is when I look at companies that are applying to our program from universities, the women and minorities coming out of universities do not seem to have the infrastructure behind. They don't have the team, they don't have the support that their other colleagues do. So they may have a fantastic idea, but they're not coming in as progressed as some of the others. And I think that is a shortfall of how businesses are treated in that early stage, particularly inside a university, where maybe if you're, and I can say this as a female scientist, I was one of very, very few. So my circle of friends was, defined a little differently. That those types of people have so much potential. If we can get to them and help them early, we have a very good shot of actually promoting some fantastic businesses and helping some people who can really change how things are done here. So I like that early to A region.
Yeah. So Rami, what are your thoughts? And that, by the way, is a very interesting answer. That, of course, the answer could be that there's more than one segment, that there are multiple segments. But if there's one or more segments that we really ought to be investing in terms of programs, et cetera, support, I mean, what should those be?
So I think it's a continuum. I don't think there's one answer. I think, again, multiple perspectives. So we are technology and agnostic at our approach. So as long as there's some technology behind you, we will look at your business and try to provide as much support as we can. But it's very easy to see where most of our portfolio companies come in. About between life sciences, which are a lot of medical devices, healthcare IT, and related technologies, and energy and / material companies, that's about 70% of our portfolio, right? So those two industries alone, and they go well with the strength in our industry. Optics photonics is one, and I think Sujatha is well aware of that. We have very, very strong medical institutions, which are leading both in many capabilities, including anything related to telemedicine, vaccine development, et cetera, my MS example. Kodak, Xerox, and Bausch & Lomb, if you think about it very simplistically, their expertise are taking thin layers of materials and stacking them one top of the other and functionalizing it. So anything that does with materials, and that's where Nish's company comes in to some extent, right? So we have very strong capabilities here that lend themselves to attract businesses, right? So the disadvantage, we're not strong in raising capital fast. There's capital here, but it doesn't come across as fast as it can. And so industries that are capital spend intensive, like on marketing, on buying eyeballs, et cetera, they're, I think, better served in faster capital markets. But anything that requires real infrastructure, or anything related to agriculture, manufacturing, et cetera, we have real strength. And I agree with Sujatha's point about the MW, minority and women business entities. I think it's a real unique advantage we have. So it's relatively, it's a blue ocean. Not a lot of venture capital goes there. Not enough management support goes into it. So we were fortunate enough to be elected by Governor Cuomo to manage an MWB fund, a Minority Women Business Fund. Very small, $2 million, not a lot. 50% of those companies exited, right? It's our best performing fund of all of the 6 funds we run. So to Sujatha's point, if you wrap them, those entrepreneurs, with the right support system, sometimes a little bit more, because their starting point is not often as robust as the typical entrepreneur you see, I think that the outcomes can be tremendous. And that's really a unique asset for our community, because I think I'm going to piggyback on one of Nish's earlier points. I don't know how to quantify it, but people are really nice here, right? It's very easy to get a cup of coffee with somebody that in a bigger city you are not likely to get their ear over time, right? And that is an unbelievable asset, right? Both in terms of redirecting or sometimes quashing opportunities that should not be a waste of time, and more importantly, progressing the right opportunities, because the level of talent is really a phone call away. And it's like I always say, invest in a Starbucks card, because that will probably be the best investment you can make in the Rochester area, because the people here are amazing. The ability to talk to some of the folks on this panel, excluding me, I'm talking about the real helpful people, and others in the community, it's always amazing. And it's really an underappreciated asset that I don't know how you market that, but that's the answer. I'll just add one thought to the continuum. The younger the company is, right, the closer they are to a PowerPoint stage, the easier it is to move. Right? You have usually 1 or 2 people, maybe 3 people involved. You come in. The more sophisticated the company, more established it is. Now you have a manufacturing operation, you have staff, et cetera. To move the company is much more challenging, right? So that's why I'm saying there's a continuum, right? And I agree, the niche we end up focusing on, again, with the Israeli companies, we're starting to expand to other countries as well, is for Israeli startups, it's very common to, once they reach a certain stage, which is kind of the A round roughly, they're looking to grow internationally. United States is a very typical beachhead. New York State is New York City is very, very typical. And then we're trying to just, hey, if you are in healthcare IT, if you're optics photonics, if you are material science, right, and some other applications, take a look at Rochester, and the response are very surprising. So there's a very willing market that is coming in. And for us, since I don't want to, it's very difficult to pinpoint one sector, because why am I helping this sector and not anybody else, right? I want to be inclusive and want to welcome everybody else, but I want that my efforts, which I don't have a lot of money or unlimited time, I want those efforts to be impactful, right? So I want to move a company that is not 1 or 2 people. I want a company that is 10 people, that is poised to grow much faster. And working with resources like GRE, NextCore, Venture Creations in the community, and now obviously universities, it's an amazing asset base that we have here.
So you mentioned women and minority-owned businesses, and let me actually pivot back for a few minutes to Sujatha, because that's kind of a topic we also spoke about at one point earlier. And you have some thoughts about how, first of all, important that area is of making sure that we are kind of trying to attract and trying to recruit really kind of this much broader base of individuals. Can you talk a little bit about what are the things that people can do, and what does your organization do to have success in that area?
So change begins with me is really important. So before we could say, I'm going to go out and find these entrepreneurs, or they need this or they need that, we need to take a look at our own organization. So if you look at my advisory board, which is the advisory board that helps us choose which companies we bring in, we made sure the advisory board was diverse. Because if you have different diverse thought right at that level, then you're going to recruit appropriately. So we have quite a nice mix on the advisory level. And we're always looking for more people who are from MWBE groups and underrepresented groups who have been through this process and know some of the challenges you're going to face. And so that group helps select, and also sets a tone that says we're going to be diverse. So 40% of our companies are MWBE or MWBE candidates. So that was number one. Number two is when you recruit, this goes back to how you get, it's a complicated question. So you need to seek out different sources. People tend to go after the same old sources of innovation, the same university, which is all fine, but you have to make a really active effort to reach out to those communities that are not always people don't reach out to, and you need to do it a few times. You need to build that confidence. So that's on our end what was terribly, terribly important. And once we bring people in, we need to teach ourselves and others how to listen differently. And I think that's probably one of the critical things. When you say, women and minority businesses are typically underinvested. They come in without as much infrastructure behind them, and then they don't garner the same level of investment. So we need to be really cognizant of that and actively seek out to fund and help people in those positions at earlier stages. And if we do that, we have so much more diversity of innovation, of capability, because when you have diversity of thought, you have so much more to grow with. You're planting so many different seeds and you're hitting so many different markets. So it's not all altruistic. It really is for the benefit of society and finance and for everything that we recognize this huge chunk of the population and make sure that we fund it and bring their ideas forward. So I think we do that. And while they're in here, it's a difficult place to navigate. So we need to hold their hand. We need to help them get access to other money. We need to both teach them how to pitch so these other people, the old school thinking can understand them. We need to teach old school thinking how to listen better so that it's a different, if you hear a different voice, that you understand it. It's a lot of work, but rewarding.
So actually, one of the questions that came from one of the people listening kind of relates a little bit to the last part of what you just talked about, which is kind of diversity of age, if you will. And there's some people that I think legitimately kind of look at, especially organizations that are meant to help entrepreneurs, and they'll note that, well, the kind of people that are mentors tend to be, 50 plus, right? They are kind of an older generation, older school generation. And maybe, and I'll kind of start off kind of maybe back to Rami for a minute, who's, you're obviously very familiar with kind of the local colleges and universities. Are we doing the right things in terms of kind of this younger brand of entrepreneurs to make sure that the programs and the support also work for them?
So I'll start. Look, if you follow the research, right, there's really two main groups of entrepreneurs. It's the 20-year-olds that are usually out of college, just learned something, right? But there's also, and now have a new perspective and new innovation. But there's also the second group, which is not smaller than the first group, is the 50-plus-year-olds, right? Who are empty nesters, who have some experience. So I understand we all want the cool, hip, young stuff. It looks much, much better on TV than old folks like me, right? But you need to help entrepreneurs where they are, not where you want them to see them on MTV, right? Or Jersey Shore, right? So that's reality, right? So that's thing. So I think it's, to Sujata's point, is you find deals where you look for them, right? So if you work with students, which we have for us specifically, we have a strong program of analysts. That we at the height we had about 15 analysts, PhD, MS students, and undergrads from all the colleges, from anyway from Ithaca to Nazareth College, on Fisher, University of Buffalo, U of R, RIT, right? So we lecture them, we present, we come in, we try to mentor them and connect them, right? So again, I don't think it's anything unique that you need to do. It's more of the same, right? You need to go and make sure that those folks understand that it's available to them. I don't care how old you are. I don't care what your background is. So do you have something that is of value that I can help with, and or not? And sometimes you may have something that is of great value that I don't have the skill set to help with, which is perfect. And I'll do my best to refer you to the person that can actually help. It's not about the ego or who owns it, right? I always joke that most of the people that make the observations about working with younger people and the fact that the panelists and the mentors are old tend to be in the 50-plus crowd themselves, right? So it all goes around. It's a question of openness of mind, right? Are you willing to see people where they are, what they can do, and try to help them? And that's it. The rest doesn't matter.
Alex, may I add something?
That's my perspective.
And this really has to do with companies where you're talking about a hardware tech focus. Yes, a lot of our mentors are older, but in technology businesses, they don't fail because the idea is bad. They rarely fail. By the time they get to the idea is good. What fails a business is usually operations and sales and marketing, which is how do I get this widget made on cost, in quantity, and shipped from point A to point B and sold through the right marketing channels and get it all out there. That's experience. Okay, there isn't a class that's going to teach you how to get your supply chain under control. There are just some things that come from horror shows and experience. And when we bring in these mentors that work with them, they're mentors who have done this back and forth and can help them say, you know what, you need to make that at 25 cents a part and it's currently $1.20. Let me tell you where, let's get this in place. So I think that, don't underestimate the value of it. You want that dynamic. And, our entrepreneurs in our program, they range. We have entrepreneurs that are, in their early 20s, they're finishing their undergraduate, to people like Rami, who said that who are, 50 and doing something. So we have a wide diversity in entrepreneurs, but we don't necessarily, our marketing team has a lot of youth in it, but our engineering experience is experience, and it's terribly important.
So Nish, maybe a question to you. You obviously came from Boston, which is certainly known for having a lot of youthful energy and students, also a very diverse community in terms of very international kind of place. How have you found Rochester with regard to that, youthful, innovative, entrepreneurial side of things, as well as just the diversity that you've experienced after moving here?
Right. So I think going back to the question of entrepreneur and how they set up with the youthful energy of it. If you look at in my own company, Sundensity, most of my tech employees are fresh graduates from UFR and RIT. So average age of my company may be 35, while my age may be slightly more than 50, right? So I think that's where what I see is that the young talent is very, very important for startup, because if you know too much, you will probably not do startup company. So I think we want people who are really enthusiastic and say, okay, go for it. And they will not worry too much about, they'll jump, as they say, you jump in the water and then try to swim. And that only happens with the young talent. So I think I'm very blessed with that in UFR and RIT. So most of our students are either even right now finishing their degree, or from the optics and photonics program, or they have just graduated from it, and they are mavericks. They are not afraid of going into the new areas, which a seasoned scientist will say, maybe I need to think 2 months about it. No, we need to do it now. And I think that's, and what I'm finding is that we are finding very diversified talent here in UFR. And so we have, of course, the local Rochester student, and a lot of them, and also some of the international students who are coming from all over the world. And I think it will become a magnet for them to look at a company which is hardware company. We are not doing software. We are doing something manufacturing. And I think that, as Sujata said, and Rami said, it's difficult task to do a manufacturing company, especially when all the manufacturing jobs are gone to the other countries, to bring that back. So our goal is to create America-made solar panels, for example, and redominate into the photovoltaic world, where it has gone on to the other side of the world. So I think to bring that back is a challenge, because some of these capabilities are not there. But what we see in Rochester particularly is the infrastructure created by Kodak and Xerox is phenomenal. And it can be regutted, restarted, revitalized. And I think that's where I come back to revitalize what asset you had. And if you go to Kodak, the old building, phenomenal infrastructure was created. There are about 60 buildings out there, and maybe 30 of them may be empty for us to go in and restart the entire economy here. So I'm very excited, because also we are getting price point advantage, which I would not get in Boston. Boston price points are almost 3 times more than the Rochester point, especially real estate, and also the salaries of the employees are way higher in Boston, New York, and Los Angeles, and San Fran. So I think this is a really mid-sized city which attracts a lot of talents, and of course with outdoor activities. It's a very outdoorsy town, and I'm just realizing that there's a life beyond the entrepreneurship. So I think we are getting real excited to bring all the young talents and do a whole bunch of outside activities as well.
Excellent, thank you. So this may be
Alex,
just based on the time.
Jump in for 1 second.
Oh yeah, of course.
Oh, sorry. No, I just want to say, you can see why we love Nish, but because I think he's spot on. It's very difficult to get 50 years worth of experience at the age of 25, right? On the other hand, it's very difficult to have the energy of full speed ahead, down the roadblocks and the torpedoes, and when you are kind of burned a few times in life and you're over 50. So you need both. It's not an either or.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Sujata, the other thing that really stood out to me from a discussion we had earlier is your kind of much more nuanced take about how we should think about kind of the return on our investment, if you will, as a community. So for instance, you talked about the fact that, look, it's not always about trying to move a headquarters here or an entire manufacturing facility, that there are all sorts of other types of economic impact to measure. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that seems like maybe a mentality that more people in the economic development and political world ought to understand.
Yeah, so the world of return on investment has always been rather bipolar, right? So investors, straight up investors, they're like, I want 5x return on my cash in 4 years or whatever. And they're just looking to see how fast can I sell it. And on the other end, economic development is like, who started, how many businesses are headquartered located here? I ask you to think of it differently. I ask you to think, if you want to help your community, it's not the question of where the headquarters is. I don't care. It is where do you put employment? Where do you access the resources? So if somebody is headquartered in Bolivia and has this great idea, and they're going to make this product, and they're going to use contract manufacturing from one of our places here and have an assembly group here, they've effectively built a product here, and they've utilized the supply chain that's in the region. They've hired some other people in the region. Employment has gone up. A product is being made and shipped. Money is made, and that company in Bolivia, if it is sold, if it is publicly traded or whatever, the money's also going to come back to us. But there are different things to look at when you say, is this good for my region? And that's employment. That's, are you making some product shipping from here? And it is cash. So we need to look, and also, what is it doing? Who is it employing? So when you put a business in downtown Rochester, and this is definitely not a particular type of business, but when you bring businesses to downtown Rochester, to places where you want to give people more chances, be that maybe in the food and ag industry, you're employing the people that are here, which is really great. When you bring a business from outside, it's nice, and people, and they're liking the region, but you haven't put people who are unemployed to work. You haven't helped the people who are right here and working. And so that concept to bring something here is not necessarily as advantageous as you have to grow something here. And that's what I look at. So if you manufacture, if you do something, you're doing good.
Excellent, thank you. So last question for you, Rami, just within a minute or two. Obviously, kind of your other big hat that you wear, in addition to trying to get Israeli startups, is Accel. Many people kind of talk about, hey, to what extent is it difficult to recruit or retain because of how many funders we have and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the evolution over the last couple of years? How problematic or not problematic is it in terms of the amount of capital we have for investment in startups here?
So the biggest challenge if you're trying to attract big top-tier talent as a startup, right? The earlier they are, the riskier the startup is, right? So if we're trying to move an executive or somebody else who can really grow the business from a target-rich area like Boston and New York City, and they're coming here and said, I love this opportunity, understand Accel, now finally we can write real checks, we can write $1 million check out of it, right? Together with $3-4 other $1 million around us. So I know that I have funding for this opportunity. But what happens if we hit a roadblock, right? Where do I go next, right? So if you're in Boston, right, you jump into the next startup, which is like two seconds down the road. In Rochester, it's more challenging, right? So I would say Rochester is less of a pyramid; it's more of an Eiffel Tower, right? It becomes very, very narrow the more you can go up, and that's the biggest challenge. So to Sujata's point, the more we can build the ecosystem and we build the critical mass here, the easier it is because there are more opportunities to move in to feed one another. And it ties to me back to, I think I completely agree with Sujata about the economic development missions. When I was in Israel, I was still practicing law. I was part of a group of attorneys that helped the Israeli government change its laws. So whenever you get money from the Israeli government, you do not have to maintain your headquarters in Israel. You go whatever is natural for the business because the business wants to grow. Right? It doesn't care about an address or a street. And nobody wants to move unless there's a good reason. So I'm not going to uproot my family just because, there's a nicer sign somewhere else. I need to have a very legitimate business because it's a very challenging environment to do that. So the more we can have opportunities like that, the easier it is to attract talent. And the more we had, this year has been amazing. We had three exits since the beginning of the year, waiting for our fourth shortly. Hopefully, knock on wood, the first unicorn will happen shortly. And that will create a lot of excitement and opportunity in the community. And the more you create visibility, easier to bring the next talent, the more people are experienced and know about it, and it all kind of spirals up, and that's what we're hoping for.
Excellent. Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Sujatha, Rami, Nish. Actually, Nish, I love the fact that you were the one person on the panel with a big Rochester skyline behind you. That's terrific. Hopefully that's an example to many others today. But thank you all very much. Thank you also to NextCore and Jim Sanal for co-presenting this with us. And I wish everybody a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Thank you
much,
so much.
everyone.
Thank you.
So nice to be with you. We appreciate your time today. We'll see you next time.